and I anticipated that he would be eager with a question, and I would be really, really eager to provide him with an answer. But there is $600 billion that this Liberal government has spent in the last 2 years that is unaccounted for. And so I can't tell him where he should have spent less money because he won't tell us in the first place where he spent the money. It's time for this government to be honest and transparent with Canadians. Where's the cash?
The honourable member will have almost 4 minutes after question period to pursue with questions and comments. Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Mont-Royal.
Madam Speaker, the use of the term apartheid to depict the state of Israel is offensive and absurd. Israel is Canada's close friend and ally. It is a vibrant democracy with members of its minority communities serving in parliament, the judiciary, and in all professions. Yet on Canadian college campuses, Jewish students have to deal with manifestations of intolerance, ranging from pro-BDS motions to the banning of kosher food affiliated with Israel. Recently, Erwin Kotler spoke at the University of Toronto, and he referred to the internationally developed IRA definition of anti-Semitism. 45 faculty members wrote a letter claiming Kotler was promoting racism by using the IRA definition. Imagine that, Madam Speaker. Our special envoy on anti-Semitism is accused of promoting racism by using a definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the Canadian and Ontario governments, as well as the US, the UK, France, and Germany. Special envoy Kotler has a thick skin and can handle absurd claims, but our students shouldn't have to deal with such abuse. They should feel safe and comfortable on campus.
The honourable member for Kenora.
Madam Speaker, this month marks 1 year since all long-term boil water advisories on reserve were supposed to have ended. Unfortunately, as we know, despite some positive strides taken by the government, they failed to meet this promise. Madam Speaker, of the 20 communities in Ontario currently affected, over half are in the Kenora riding. The residents of Northwest Angle 33, Bearskin Lake, Deer Lake, Fort Hope, Mishkegaugaming, Muskrat Dam, Nibinamik, Nishkantaga, Wawakapawin, Wiagamal Lake, North Spirit Lake, Sandy Lake, Sachigo Lake, and many more across the country are simply asking for a basic human right that is afforded to everyone else in this country. Madam Speaker, it is time that the government keeps its promise, and it's time that all of us work in this chamber to end all long-term drinking water advisories on reserve.
The honourable member for Mississauga-Streetsville.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Speaker.
To join the Meet and Greet Senior Club Mississauga to celebrate the launch of their book titled Our Experiences of COVID-19. Their book comprises the seniors' stories sharing how they coped with the isolation and challenges of the pandemic. Cette réussite n'aurait pas...
This success wouldn't have been possible if people hadn't taken their time to courageously describe the difficulties they endured during these past 2 years. Despite the many challenges, they persevered and created something positive by creating this book.
Seniors Club Mississauga is a tight-knit and active group. I am fortunate to see firsthand their vibrant energy and the joy they spread amongst one another. I want to acknowledge Dr. Saperwal, Chanda Patodia, Subhash Mudan, Urmila Bedi, as well as all the directors, volunteers, and participants who have made the Seniors Club what it is today. I would like to...
The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Madam Speaker, we are seeing a disturbing rise in hate in all its toxic forms in Canada. An alarming increase in racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, and transphobia. Stop Hate for Profit is an ongoing campaign to hold social media companies accountable for hate on their platforms. Social media must prioritize people over profit, and they must do it now. Meta and other social media companies must be responsible for the hate they've profited from. They must take down groups focused on white supremacy and hate and violent conspiracies and disinformation. They must monitor groups for hate speech and violence, and they must put substantial funding to support initiatives and organizations to fight racism, hate, and division. The convoy takeover of Ottawa shows how extremism and hate and disinformation thrive in this toxic environment. It is time to stop hate for profit. The future of our democracy depends on it.
The honourable member for Saint Laurent.
Today, March 25th, is a very important day for Greeks across Canada and around the world. On this day, 201 years ago, Greece won back their independence from the Ottoman Empire during the Revolutionary War of 1821. Brave men and women, heroes, fought, many to their death, for the freedom of future generations of Greeks. Today, we honor and remember heroes such as Theodoros Kolokodroni, Laskarina Bouboulina, and Rigas Fereos, whose famous words were «Καλύτερα μιας ώρας ελεύθερη ζωή παρά 40 χρόνια σκλαβιά και φυλακή», which translates to, it's finer to live one life, 1 hour, as a free man than 40 years as a slave and prisoner. We celebrate their victory, for we would not be where we are today if it were not for them. Χρόνια πολλά σε όλους τους Έλληνες. Ζήτω η Ελλάδα, ζήτω ο Καναδάς, ζήτω η 25η Μαρτίου.
Ζήτω.
The honourable member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Madam Speaker, on Sunday, April 11, 2021, Fireman Lance Thistle of Gander Bay North Fire Department was driving on the Trans-Canada Highway near Lewisport Junction when he came upon a truck that had overturned in the ditch and landed in a body of water. He proceeded to enter the cold, waist-deep water to render assistance. He broke the window with his hand and a pocket knife, and with the eventual help of others, managed to help the victims keep their head above water. After cutting the seatbelts, they were able to extract them from the vehicle, and the Lewisport Fire Rescue rendered assistance when they arrived on the scene. By the time Lance returned to his vehicle, he could hardly feel his feet, so he proceeded to his destination in Norris Arm to get warm, dry clothes. Madam Speaker, I salute Mr. Thistle and all first responders for their bravery in serving our communities.
The honourable member for Kanata Carleton.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Kanata Carleton Indo-Canadians Association on their first Holi celebration event and extend my sincere thanks to Najmani Sharma for the kind invitation. Last weekend, Indo-Canadians from across Kanata Carleton gathered at their local community centre, danced, sang, and celebrated the start of the highly anticipated spring season. This year's Festival of Colours was one of the first times in over 2 years that our community has been able to gather and celebrate a special occasion together with friends. The Festival of Holi serves as a timely reminder of the ultimate triumph of light over darkness. It invites us to remain optimistic in our daily lives and remember that better days always lie ahead. As we emerge from the pandemic, we can all look forward to the year ahead, a year of more celebration, more togetherness with optimism and joy. Thank you.
The honourable member for Willowdale.
Madam Speaker, 4 weeks after Vladimir Putin's latest illegal invasion of Ukraine, 2 facts are crystal clear. Putin's capacity for impunity knows no bounds, and the resolve and fortitude of Ukrainians is unparalleled. While in Poland last week, I witnessed firsthand the mass displacement Putin's military has unleashed. While heart-wrenching, the trip confirmed for me that Putin's atrocities have galvanized the international community like never before. At every town along the Polish-Ukrainian border, I was inspired to witness numerous humanitarian agencies and NGOs and to catch glimpses of countless individuals from around the world arriving to aid Ukrainians. At times like this, we must all resolve to ensure that our country continues to prove steadfast in supporting the government of Ukraine and that we do all we can to assist individual Ukrainians in their hour of need. Let it never be said that our country shirked from its response.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Madam Speaker, Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the bombing of innocent civilians has touched the hearts of Canadians across the country. In my riding of Sarnia-Lambton, the outpouring of generosity has been overwhelming. As we speak, I'm working with Pastor Tim from Bethel Church, a sponsor organization, Ed Dixon from Loads of Love, who has people helping on the ground in Ukraine, and Luda Koloshenko, who's the executive director for the Canadian Ukraine Immigrant Aid Society, to facilitate 25 families to be hosted in our riding. More than $30,000 has been raised for aid, and the support keeps pouring in. We must stand with Ukraine in their time of need, to stand for democracy, to stand for freedom in the world, to help those who need the compassion of Canadians. I encourage the government to charter flights immediately to rescue those who have fled to neighboring nations. Together, we can be a force of good in dark times. Slava Ukraine.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Madam Speaker, it is with great sorrow that I rise in the House today to share with my colleagues and constituents the news of the passing of Laurie Cranton, who was the longtime councillor and warden for the county of Inverness. Laurie was passionate about serving his community. He dedicated himself to each project he took on and will be remembered fondly by all who are fortunate to work with him. On top of that, Madam Speaker, Laurie was a tireless advocate for accessibility. As a young man, Laurie was struck by a falling tree and left a quadriplegic from the accident. He did not pity himself, Madam Speaker, or seek pity from anyone else. What Laurie wanted was a more accessible and inclusive community for all. I'm very proud to have become friends with Laurie over the years as an MP. And I believe that we're in a better place because of the impact Laurie made on his community. My thoughts are with his loved ones at this difficult time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to pay tribute to a 100-year-old World War II veteran, James Francis Edwards, also known as Stocky Edwards. A Saskatchewan native, Mr. Edwards joined the Royal Canadian Air Force out of college in 1942. Over the next 3 years, he became Canada's highest-scoring ace in the Western Desert Campaign, attributed with 19 confirmed kills and many more unconfirmed. He served in North Africa, Italy, and on the Western Front, and piloted historic planes like the P-40 Kitty Hawk, the submarine Spitfire, and the Hawker Tempest. He flew from the day he joined until VE Day and was never shot down. After the war, he continued to serve Canada for over 20 years, staying in the Air Force until 1972 to train and mentor the next generation. The country owes an irredeemable debt of gratitude. May his legend never be forgotten.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nearly 120 members of the 5e Régiment d'Artillerie Légère du Canada are now deployed on Operation Reassurance in Latvia. This regiment, stationed at the Valcartier military base in my riding of Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, has participated in numerous missions since its creation in May 1968, including combat contingents in Kandahar, peacekeeping missions in Cyprus, Haiti, and Bosnia, and internal security missions, including the Oka crisis. This deployment to Latvia will last approximately 3 months, and the Canadian Armed Forces will conduct NATO-specific tasks, training, and exercises. This important support will help increase security and stability in Central and Eastern Europe. We are proud to have them join the other members already serving in this region. Thank you to our brave men and women who are always ready to serve. In the context of the invasion in Ukraine, your presence is of utmost importance. Have a good mission. The Honourable Member for Alfred Pilla. Madam Speaker, on March 26th, we will be celebrating Purple Day in support of epilepsy awareness. I invite all Canadians to dress in purple to raise awareness of this disease that affects more than 250,000 people in Canada. It's an opportunity to better understand how we can make a difference for people with epilepsy.
I would like this statement to honor the memory of Ryan Anthony Perotti, a 7-year-old boy from my riding who passed away victim of epilepsy. There are stories like this all across the country, but we never want it to happen again. Raising awareness on ways to deal with an epileptic attack and actions to take when faced with a seizure can be life-saving. On this Purple Day, let's wear purple and educate ourselves on the realities of epilepsy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Hamilton Centre.
10,028. 10,028 children, all casualties of a brutal and protracted war, a genocide waged over generations against the First Nations of these lands. These kidnapped children, laid to rest in unmarked graves uncovered at just the first 11 out of 128 institutions, only just recently repatriated to their families and First Nations after decades of pain and generations of trauma. May these children, their families, and communities finally find peace in their final return home, and may those still searching find their own peace in the same. May the survivors, their families, and communities find the justice as First Nations leaders prepare to meet with Pope Francis next week, seeking a formal apology for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools and immediate actions, including returning land properties back to First Nations and investments in healing initiatives to ensure support for survivors and their descendants. And finally, may we in this House take our own responsibilities given the legacies of these atrocities and finally fully consider the same.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. Madam Speaker, it is with great enthusiasm that I rise today to share with you my regional pride. For the third time in 10 years, the Université du Québec à Rimouski has taken the lead in the ranking of the best Canadian university in its research category. Founded barely 50 years ago, UQAD has quickly distinguished itself thanks to its 3 areas of excellence well anchored in local issues, namely marine science, regional development, and the North. It also conducts research in the natural sciences, humanities, social sciences, and health sciences. UQAD's triumph demonstrates once again that it is possible to conduct research of international scope in our regions, Madam Speaker. Congratulations to all of the students, researchers, and staff who made this achievement possible, and long live this great, small university.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, contrary to what the Minister of Health is saying, the federal government's insistence on the absolute necessity of vaccine mandates is not founded in science. Some Canadians choose to remain unvaccinated and always will. That's simply a fact. It was not an easy choice for them, but because of real anxiety about COVID vaccines, they have sacrificed their jobs and their ability to travel to see loved ones. Our Prime Minister shamefully labeled these Canadians as racist and misogynist, and he refused to apologize or even show a hint of decency and dignity. And that has been noticed all around the world. Regardless of how the Prime Minister feels about someone's personal choices, it's time to accept them. It's time to treat people with the dignity and respect. The provinces are following the science, the mandates are lifting, and we are all learning to live with COVID. On behalf of my constituents in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, and all Canadians, I call upon the government to have compassion and immediately drop these punitive mandates.
Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. Canadians across the country are helping Ukrainians in crisis. Our community in Ottawa is no different. Recently, I visited the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Ukrainian Orthodox Cathedral in Ottawa, where I saw dozens of volunteers collecting and sorting donations for the people of Ukraine. The energy was palpable. In the weeks since the illegal Russian aggression, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress's Ottawa branch have been organizing around the clock, collecting donations consisting of clothes, hygiene products, medical supplies, and supplies for shelter. In Ottawa, Speaker, over 300 volunteers helped to collect and sort a total of 85,000 pounds of donations, which were shipped to Poland and then to a Meast warehouse in Lviv in western Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, I want to say a massive thank you to the organizers of this effort, Olenka Bastian, Vanessa Rushitnik, and the entire planning committee. While the impacts of this completely unjustifiable invasion have been global, so too our response to it. The people of Ottawa will continue to support Ukraine and the Ukrainian Canadian community. Thank you.
Oral questions, questions orables.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, the Health Minister apologized in this House after being bombarded by questions from the official opposition on when the federal vaccine mandates will be lifted. And I appreciate the Minister's gesture, Madam Speaker, but he did not answer any of our questions about when these health mandates will be lifted. And to quote the Minister, the member has the right to have access to all the information if he wants to continue to play a solid role as an MP. And I want to do that, Madam Speaker. I'll take him at his word. Will he table today for all members of this House the scientific studies and opinions which recommend that the NDP Liberal government continue to impose a vaccine mandate? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, I'll say what I said yesterday. I have a great deal of respect for the work of my colleague, and I respect his personality as well. He does great work not only within his Conservative caucus, and here in the House of Commons, and I'll always be there to help him do his work. And as I said, if you would like to have more information, more studies, he can, and with his critic, contact us, and we will continue to provide that information. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Well, Madam Speaker, I was hoping he would table the documents here in this House so that all members could have access to the same information at the same time, and particularly to the scientific studies which have shown that this government had a recommendation to impose a vaccine mandate. But this week, Canadians learned that there's a new NDP Liberal government. There's an agreement that was signed behind closed doors. We have a few details that have been made public, but both government parties refused to make the full deal public, Madam Speaker. The Natural Resource Minister yesterday promised to increase our exports of oil to Europe by 300,000 barrels. Can the NDP Liberal government say that if it recognizes now, today, that Canada has an important role to play as a country that produces oil? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The situation in Ukraine highlights the importance of energy security for our allies in Europe and around the world. Our country does not have to worry in terms of its energy security, while Europe has to face this geopolitical challenge with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We're looking at all necessary measures to continue to make sure that there is energy supply that is safe in Canada and around the world. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Well, I'm happy to hear that the NDP side of this NDP Liberal government approves of that, Madam Speaker. Let's stick with natural resources. Canada has been and remains a major player in agriculture around the world. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is making waves in international markets. Prices are going up. There's a fertilizer shortage, and prices are outrageous. Canadian farmers can help families around the world if the federal government supports them by eliminating barriers to production and to export. Will this NDP Liberal government finally show some leadership and offer our farmers the support, all the support that they need? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I've had the chance to sit with him on the Agriculture Committee, and our agreements with our farmers are very important. We're very aware of the situation in Ukraine, which was caused by President Putin. We are working with stakeholders to make sure that we can provide products at a reasonable price, and we'll have more news to share in the coming days.
For Calgary-Midnapore.
This NDP Liberal government has spent the last 7 years destroying the natural resources sector. Suddenly, after a world fuel crisis, they recognize the necessity of ethically produced oil and gas and have promised an extra 300,000 barrels per day. Bad news for this government. Due to their destruction of the sector and denying pipelines from being built, Canada will struggle to fill this demand. Right. So when will this NDP Liberal government apologize to Ukrainians, apologize to Europeans, and apologize to Canadians for being so short-sighted?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the current situation in Ukraine underscores the importance of energy security of our allies in Europe and around the world, and our country is in a secure position in terms of energy supply. As Europe needs to address the geopolitical and socioeconomic challenges presented by the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, we're considering all measures to preserve energy supply chains in Canada and around the world. Madam Speaker, as the situation in Europe changes, we are working to ensure reliable energy supply to our allies in Europe, around the world, and it's recognized that we are doing the work necessary.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Well, not only did this government not build any pipelines, they eliminated hundreds of thousands of jobs in this sector. And to add insult to injury, they called it a just transition. Yet now, as Ukrainians suffer and Europe suffers from a fuel shortage, they've suddenly decided they can turn on the taps again and increase production. This is after thousands of Canadians lost their jobs, lost their homes, went bankrupt, and were also displaced. So I have a question for the minister. What is so just about that?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I also want to clarify for the member opposite the role of oil here in Canada. As far as under our government, imported oil has consistently decreased to the lowest levels in 10 years. The majority of oil that's imported in Canada comes from the United States, 4 out of every 5 imported barrels.
Can we have order to listen to the answer to the question? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Some of the refineries in Ontario and Quebec import exclusively from the United States. We are working with Canadian energy workers to ensure the sector is supported today and in years to come.
The Honourable Member from Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, for years we have been asking the federal government to increase health transfers. The Conservatives they eliminated indexation, and the Liberals have continually refused to fix this situation. That means that the federal government's support has been going down year after year. While Quebec is forced to make difficult choices, the federal government is continuing to cut in health. That's very cynical, and there are people, real people, who are dealing with the consequences of that. Will the minister listen to Quebec and increase health transfers to 35% without conditions? The Honourable Health Minister. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. We are listening and we are working. We have been working for a number of months now on this. My colleague, the previous Minister of Health, has been working with the provinces and Quebec throughout the pandemic. We speak every week, and that's why we not only have a health transfer that is going to go up from $43 to $44 billion, but there was increased funding throughout the pandemic, along with the $3 billion for long-term care, along with the $3 billion for mental health, along with the $3 billion to protect those who want to stay at home and receive appropriate time. And I see that my time has run out. The Honourable Member from Manicouagan. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The National Assembly is unanimous. Health transfers need to go up without conditions. Quebec knows what it needs. Everyone in Quebec understands this, except for the federal Liberals and the member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, because they think they know better. They think they know what the government of Quebec should be doing. They're health experts. How many federal family doctors are there? Or how many federal nurses are there? Listen, Madam Speaker, increasing health transfers to 35% without condition. Annual indexation, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Merci.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. This allows me to highlight the role and the importance and the good work of a federation that has been working together over the last 2 years. In Canada, the reason that we've come out of the pandemic better than other countries is because we have been able to take advantage of a federation where governments have been working together to deliver vaccines, to deliver rapid tests, to deliver billions of pieces of personal protection equipment, and we've been able to offer help to people who need it. $8 out of 10 to pay for the pandemic has come, Madam Speaker, from the strength of our federation.
For Edmonton, Strathcona.
The horrific images of the war in Ukraine have been brutal to watch. Yet at the same time, the war in Yemen has raged for 7 years. Over 10,000 children have been killed. The country's economy has collapsed and millions are facing hunger. Canada continues to export weapons to Saudi Arabia despite those weapons being used in Yemen. In fact, the United Nations Human Rights Council has twice named Canada as one of the states fueling this war. Canada must stop exporting weapons to Saudi Arabia. Will the minister commit to doing this?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada remains deeply concerned about the situation in Yemen and supports a political solution as the only way to end the ongoing conflict and horrendous humanitarian crisis. The Government of Canada is committed to a stronger and more rigorous arms export system. This is why we acceded to the Arms Trade Treaty. Human rights considerations are now at the center of our export regime. Madam Speaker, I, as Minister, will deny any permit application where there's a substantial risk of human rights violation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Skeena Buckley Valley.
Madam Speaker, on Monday, the minister said he won't privatize Via Rail. But I'm confused because he just put out a call for a private operator to operate rail on the Quebec-Windsor corridor. To maximize profits, the private operator will get to, and I quote, set train schedules, fare strategies, and service standards. This is going to cost Canadians. If it sounds like privatization, and it looks like privatization, it's probably privatization. Why won't the minister admit it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his question. The high-frequency train is the biggest infrastructure project that Canada has seen in decades, and it will be built. With our call for interest, we're looking for industry expertise that has experience putting in place major products so we get the best result for Canadians. Via Rail is at the heart of this project, and we will work in collaboration and partnership with the private sector throughout the process. We will make sure that workers and their benefits are respected. Thank you, and I thank my colleague for his question.
Member for Foothills.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a global food crisis is emerging, and Canadian farmers want to help. But Liberal policies like a farm-killing carbon tax, trucking mandates are handcuffing Canadian farmers who are already facing skyrocketing input costs on things like fertilizer. A 35% tariff on purchases of fertilizer from Russia is going to hurt. As we get ready for the spring planting season, farmers need certainty. Will fertilizer purchased from Russia before March 2nd be exempt from this tariff? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the Honourable's question. We've heard from stakeholders that it's an important issue. We are analysing the impacts on our local farmers to ensure that they do have access to fertilizer, and we will work with our partners to come to a reasonable solution. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
When asked about the farm-killing carbon tax, the Agriculture Minister suggested practices that farmers have adopted for decades. Crop rotation. Are you serious? Clearly, the NDP Liberal government does not understand Canada's role in food security and sustainability. Farmers don't need the Agriculture Minister robbing their bank accounts to be sustainable. They've been proudly protecting the environment for generations. Again, how much is the NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition going to cost Canadian farmers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the Honourable Member's question. There's one issue where the Honourable Member could support us, and that's passing C8. In the NC8, there's a rebate program for farmers to get a rebate on the price on pollution, and that's an action that his party could do right away. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Well, Madam Speaker, rural Canadians can't afford the carbon tax. Fertilizer and fuel costs have doubled in 2 years. The Bank of Canada said the carbon tax hikes inflation. And farm businesses already paid $14,000 a year in carbon taxes when it was at $20 a ton. But in less than a week, it'll go up 150% more than that and only increases from there. So the Liberals claim rebates cover the costs, but the PBO said the carbon tax is, quote, a net loss for Canadians. Will the NDP Liberals at least stop their April 1st increase or do what they really should do and just axe the carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On this side of the House, we...
Do I have a point of order from the Honourable?
Madam Speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and we thank the
Parliamentary Budget Officer for his work, which confirms that the price on pollution has a progressive impact and gives 8 out of 10 families more back through the climate action incentive rebates than they pay. Putting a price on carbon pollution is recognized as one of the most efficient ways to drive down emissions and fight climate change, Madam Speaker. And I would point out the Conservative member for New Brunswick Southwest is on the record saying his province should go back to using the federal carbon price. We agree with him, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Madam Speaker, Saskatchewan is the breadbasket of the world and leads the country in production of wheat, canola, and many other crops. That takes fertilizer, lots of fertilizer. According to Fertilizer Canada, this government's announcement to ration fertilizer by 30% will cost Canadian farmers $48 billion in lost income. Wow. Madam Speaker, why did this government refuse to consult with Saskatchewan before announcing its plan to ration fertilizer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, obviously we're all concerned with the situation of what's happening in Ukraine. Putin's illegal war is causing consequences on everyone around the world, and it's causing consequences for farmers here locally. We are working with the sector to ensure that we can come up with a reasonable solution. And we're analyzing the impacts on our farmers, and I'm sure that we will have something to say very shortly, but we are working with the sector to ensure that we have fertilizer in Canada.
The honourable member for King Vaughan.
Madam Speaker, in preparation for spring planting of corn, soybeans, canola, and wheat, farmers need an immense amount of fertilizer, a product facing severe supply chain issues and high tariffs. Mr. Luke Barron, a farmer in Schomberg, Ontario, is struggling to afford the increased cost of fertilizer and worries about being able to plant. What is this government doing today to ensure fairness for farmers so they can plant their crops and let Canadians enjoy the benefits of homegrown farm-to-table harvest?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I've said before, the illegal war of Putin in Ukraine is having definite consequences around the world, including here in Canada. We are working with the sector with regards to the impacts it's having on fertilizer, and we will continue to work with the sector to come up with a solution that works for our local farmers here in Canada.
The honourable member for Dauphin-Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker, Ukraine is a breadbasket of Europe, and Putin's war is fueling global food insecurity. Canadian farmers want to maximize crop production to keep feeding the world, but this NDP Liberal government is threatening our potential by pushing forth new fertilizer restrictions. Now more than ever, Canada should be encouraging crop growth, not restricting it. That's right. So why is this NDP Liberal government reducing our potential to feed the world by adding more taxes and regulations onto Canadian farmers?
Great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm happy to have many questions on the importance of fertilizer and the role it plays in Canada, and especially the importance of food security in Canada. Again, this is caused by Putin's illegal war, and we are working with the sector, as I've said before, to come up with a solution, and we will continue to work with Fertilizer Canada and its members to come up with solutions that work for our local farmers. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, Ottawa says that it wants to protect the French language, but it's taking BC's Francophones to court just because they want support for French programs. Francophones won in court to force the province to serve them in French, but the federal government is going to appeal that decision. At the heart of the conflict is the fact that Ottawa signed a labour market agreement with the province without thinking for 1 second about requiring services in French be maintained. Does the minister understand that the future of French means more services in French, not less, and it doesn't mean taking Francophones to court? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Madam Speaker, we took the difficult decision of asking for authorization to appeal this decision before the Supreme Court of Canada. We don't take this decision lightly. Our government is committed to strengthen the Official Languages Act. That is something that we did with Bill C-13. Unfortunately, we do not agree with certain aspects of the court's decision, which could or put in danger support for certain programs that benefit over 80,000 people in BC every year. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Saint Jean. Madam Speaker, let's continue to talk about francophones outside of Quebec. In the last budget, the government promised $40 million for post-secondary education in French. A year later, none of these schools have seen any money, and the fiscal year ends in 6 days. Instead of sending the money, the minister is blaming the provinces. She says that she can't do anything because of jurisdiction. Madam Speaker, it's a very sad situation. The Liberals only recognize the existence of jurisdiction when it is to their benefit and when they want to use that excuse to not serve francophones. When will the minister pay? We need a date. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, as Minister of Official Languages, I'm very happy that on March 1st I was able to table our bill to modernize the Official Languages Act. We will have a stronger act. In terms of the 2021 budget, $80 million over 3 years was promised, and announcements are coming very soon.
For Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, the failure of this government to secure a deal on softwood lumber for 7 years is having a domino effect on people's lives. A representative from the BC Council of Forest Industries testified at the Trade Committee that a lack of a deal is helping to increase inflation. This is leaving Canadian lumber costs soaring and the prices of housing construction skyrocketing. Is the NDP Liberal minister actually interested in securing a softwood lumber agreement because trees are growing faster in British Columbia than the minister's speed at securing an agreement?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member raises an issue that has been of great importance for the government for the last number of years, and I can assure the member that it is something in which we'll continue to monitor and to do the very best we can at protecting the industry. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similklin and Niccolo.
Madam Speaker, housing costs are out of control. Toronto is up 36%, Montreal 20%, Vancouver 21%, and it's clear the Liberals' plan to help good wage earners get out of their parents' basement is not working. Conservatives want to ban foreign ownership, dedicate federal properties for housing, and create density around federal transit projects. The NDP Liberals rejected all that. Since the NDP Liberals believe that Canadians are only good at convening, will they at least take the advice of Canadian realtors to convene all levels of government and the private sector to get a real plan for housing?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. On this side of the House, Madam Speaker, we are the first government to have put in place a national housing strategy. I am very surprised to see that last week a member of the official opposition said that we would need to leave that strategy. Madam Speaker, we're convinced on this side of the House that we have a solid plan to deal with affordability in the housing sector.
The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, business people in my riding of Langley Aldergrove, and indeed right across Canada, are deeply concerned that inflation is not transitory like this government likes to say, but is becoming deeply embedded in our economy. A farmer told me just recently that the cost of getting their specialty products from Langley to Calgary, Alberta has doubled from $3,200 per truckload to $6,000. Madam, this is completely unsustainable. When will this government get serious and start looking and tackling the root causes of inflation in our economy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we understand, Madam Speaker, apologies, Madam Speaker. We understand that inflation in Canada, while it's concerning at 5.7%, we are taking actions to increase affordability. And we know that we're under the average in the US, 7.9%. The OECD average is 7.2%. But we're also doing what it takes to be there for businesses. And I'm proud that Canadians, through their resilience during the pandemic, have actually created more businesses today than there were before the pandemic. But I'll keep working with members like the member from Langley Aldergrove to find solutions for businesses and for farmers and for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Just inflation is making life more expensive. Yet instead of working to give Canadians a break, the NDP Liberal government did the opposite, defeating a Conservative motion to give Canadians a gas tax holiday. With gas prices soaring by a third and with a 25% carbon tax hike, why does this NDP Liberal government insist on punishing Canadians at the pump?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, while we understand that rising energy costs is impacting Canadians, I think we all need to recognize that the carbon price itself accounts for about 8.8 cents per litre, and it's revenue neutral, which means 8 out of 10 families in Canada actually get more money back than what that costs them. With regards to the opposition motion, I gave a 15-minute speech about all the affordability measures that our government has taken, and I would note that all parties voted against that idea.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, toxic dumps, tainted drinking water, and the climate crisis disproportionately hurt racialized, Indigenous, and marginalized communities. Successive Liberal and Conservative governments have failed to act. They've failed to honour Indigenous rights, failed on climate, and failed
We have a point of order from the Honourable Member for Shefford. I'm not hearing any interpretation. Madam Speaker.
Again, is interpretation working? Perfect. The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, toxic dumps, tainted drinking water, and the climate crisis disproportionately hurt racialized, Indigenous, and marginalized communities. Successive Liberal and Conservative governments have failed to act. They've failed to honour Indigenous rights, failed on climate, and failed to support communities left with a toxic mess. The U.S. has had an Office of Environmental Justice since the 90s. This is one of Canada's Green Budget Coalition's top priorities. Will the government create an Office of Environmental Justice to protect Canadians and their communities?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm so grateful for the question, actually, because the member raises something that is critically important, and it should be important to all Canadians, but certainly is important to our government, and that is the connection between the environmental destruction that we've seen in Canada and around the world and the disproportionate impacts it has on Indigenous people. I was, for example, in Wabasamong just recently. That's a neighbouring community to Grassy Narrows. They told me about the mercury poisoning that's affected their community members. Our government is committed to working with communities to protect them from ongoing environmental racism and to protect them as they recover from these experiences. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Madam Speaker, since the release of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in 2019, the Liberals still have not released a national action plan with targets, timelines, and funding to address this ongoing genocide. Yet rates of violence have dramatically increased during the pandemic, and this Liberal government keeps stalling. Our lives are valuable. We are not disposable. When will this government implement a national action plan with timelines and the resources to address this crisis and save lives?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. Reconciliation is a journey, not a destination, and we all must walk on this journey. I thank the member for her intervention. Our government has put $2.2 billion over the past 5 years. Over the next 4 years, we will have a chance to pass 4 budgets to make sure that tangible benefits are in place and tangible results are in place for grassroots Indigenous women at the community level. And I look forward to working with the member opposite on what we can do moving forward to make lives better for Indigenous women all across Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Fleetwood, Port Kells.
Madam Speaker, this House has stood unanimously in our condemnation of Vladimir Putin's illegal and unjustifiable further invasion of Ukraine. Canada has been a leader in the global response, as we saw yesterday, when the Prime Minister announced sanctions on an additional 160 Russian officials for their complicity in these heinous acts. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs tell this House how our aggressive sanctions are putting pressure on the Putin regime?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank my colleagues.
Can we have order to listen to the answer?
We want to hear her thank you for
the Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his important question. This is a matter obviously important for all members in this House. President Putin's war on Ukraine is a war on freedom and democracy, and on the rights of Ukrainians and all people to determine their own future. We announced yesterday sanctions against 160 members of the Russian Federation Council. When we impose sanctions, we're making assets useless, and we're depriving them of any value. And going against these sanctions is a criminal offense. We'll continue to suffocate the Putin regime.
Honourable Member for Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Madam Speaker, yesterday at Public Safety Committee, Ottawa Chief of Police Steve Bell confirmed that no firearms were found during the clearing of the Ottawa protests. We also learned that an arrest was made concerning a disturbing arson attempt and that the accused had no connection to the protests. The NDP Liberal government have told Canadians that the protesters were responsible for this heinous crime and that they were armed. The evidence says otherwise. Will the Minister of Justice take responsibility on behalf of his government and acknowledge that they were spreading misinformation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Public Safety.
First, I'd like to thank all law enforcement officers who were involved in clearing the blockades. In actual fact, the Ottawa interim chief yesterday stated that information and intelligence was received around the existence of firearms within the precinct. Investigations relating to weapons continue, and no charges have been laid to date. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
According to the Polera report on racism at IRCC, some immigration officers consider immigrants from racialized countries to be, quote, corrupt, untrustworthy, or just wanted to come to Canada to collect social insurance. The Caregivers program has been plagued with backlogs and ignored by the immigration minister. Applicants from work permits have expired while their applications are lost in this Liberal-made backlog. Why are caregivers being stranded in the backlog? Is it because the minister also thinks they're just corrupt and untrustworthy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I thank the member for his question, and I sat at the same committee, and I certainly appreciate his advocacy on all the questions that he's raised. But I want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, there's zero tolerance for racism and discrimination in all aspects and all the programs that we want to deliver. And the member very much know that there's been tangible actions that are happening in real time right now within our ministry, and I will be happy to follow up on his questions. Merci.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Well, actually, no action has been taken on racism. Systemic racism is rampant in IRCC under this NDP Liberal government and is playing a role in the historic Liberal-made backlog. Neither the backlog nor racism are being addressed, and we know this because not a single person has been reprimanded or fired for racist behavior as the backlog continues to rise. Yesterday, we found out IRCC managers even got bonuses, the same managers that are accused of racism. But this is the Liberal government's legacy of rewarding bad behavior. Why should any newcomer or their family trust this minister to do his job?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I apologize earlier, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. Let me be very clear to this chamber. We have zero tolerance for racism and discrimination of any kind. And that's why IRCC has already worked hard to address racism and create real change, lasting change. We've already made significant progress from our anti-racism task force to new training to address unconscious bias. There's still much more things to do, and we will continue working hard to eradicate all forms of discrimination and build an open, fair, and inclusive immigration system.
Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Madam Speaker, it's no surprise that it's bloody cold in Edmonton in the winter, except to Service Canada, who is making seniors and the vulnerable wait outside the office for up to an hour before being led inside, because this government says it's unsafe for them to be inside because of COVID. We have masking mandates in federal buildings. We have high rates of vaccination, yet this government is making the vulnerable wait outside in the freezing cold. When will this Liberal government end their COVID theatrics, follow the science, and get back to serving Canadians.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You've been mistreated a couple of times, and I'm sorry for that. Now, Madam Speaker, this is a connection to Service Canada, which I like very much. I used to be Minister responsible for Service Canada, and I still remember how hard the workers at Service Canada work every day. It's been very difficult for them over the last 2 years, difficult because of the family and professional stress. And I think we all want to thank and congratulate them for their work and continuing to do so.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ottawa says it would like to protect French, but it does not care about Francophone veterans. In 2018, an application for disability benefits made in English was processed in 19 weeks, whilst the same application in French took 52 weeks. In 2022, what has changed? Well, this week, independent analysts from the Library of Parliament reveal that the delays are the same in English, but in French, brace yourself, it now takes 76 weeks for Francophones. 76 weeks. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The Honourable Minister.
What's going on here? Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We recognize that more needs to be done to ensure that Francophone veterans receive decisions on their applications in a timely manner. That's why we established a dedicated Francophone unit to improve processing. We've hired more Francophone and bilingual staff to further reduce wait times to Francophone veterans. With our nearly $200 million investment, we have reduced the backlog by 40%, and I can assure my honourable colleague, we will continue to work and make sure we reduce it even further. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister tabled figures at the Veteran Affairs Committee claiming that processing times for applications in French had decreased by 10%, but independent analysts confirm that it is worse than ever and that Francophones are now waiting 76 weeks. Witnesses have even told us that officials are advising veterans to apply in English because the situation is so dire. That is how the federal government serves Francophones. Will the Minister explain why his figures are being contested and why Francophones are being abandoned?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as I indicated to my honourable colleague, we have hired more Francophone employees and bilingual employees to make sure that we reduce the backlog. That's why we invested $200 million and just previously another $140 million to make sure that we continue to reduce the backlog and to make sure with the more Francophone and bilingual employees, we will make sure that the Francophone applications are reviewed in an appropriate manner. We are making sure this is done appropriately because the veterans truly deserve it.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to do a point to say that it's not the federal government that's against the Francophones, it's the Liberals that are against. Le Droit stated that the federal government wants to bring Francophones to the Supreme Court. How can the Minister for Official Languages accept and approve this from a government who is attacking Francophones and is blocking their access to Francophone services in British Columbia, Madam Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Justice. Madam Speaker, as I explained earlier, we support Francophone communities throughout Canada, as well as the Anglophone community in Quebec. Bill C-13, for example, will entrench our protection and our support for official languages in this country. The precedent from this decision could affect Canada's government to sign agreements with provinces and territories in every domain. We should not confuse different aspects. Our commitment towards official languages is firm, and we look forward to see what C-13 has to offer. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Official Languages. This government has talked about, is saying one thing on one side and another thing on the other side. The Minister for Official Languages say that she's defending the francophonie, but then the Minister for Justice refuses the Federal Appeals Court decision and wants to bring francophones back to the Supreme Court. This is hypocrisy in the highest. Perhaps the Minister for Official Languages will respect francophones for once and will stop this process in front of the courts. The Honourable Minister for Justice. Madam Speaker, we've made the difficult decision to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada in this affair. We do not take this decision lightly. Our government has committed itself to strengthening the Official Languages Act, which is what we've done with Bill C-13. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, we do not agree with certain parts of the Federal Appeals Court decision that could jeopardize supporting training and labour that 80,000 people from British Columbia obtain now.
Last year, a week into the Atlantic mackerel season, a confused DFO closed it. Then a few days later, they opened it. Then fishermen landed their quota within about 2 days in locations where mackerel are not traditionally found. DFO has not assessed the stock off the Scotian shelf in more than a decade, yet they continue to cut the quota. The NDP Liberal government just closed the healthy Pacific herring stocks against the science. Holy mackerel, will this government start listening to fishermen, or are they just incompetent?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you for that question, Madam Speaker. I have taken many opportunities to be on wharfs, to listen to fishers, to listen to the boat owners, to listen to the processors, and my goal is to build a healthy and sustainable and growing fish and seafood sector. And for that, we need sustainable stocks. So there is no decision at this point on mackerel stocks, but I can assure the member that while conservation is the baseline for future growth of the stock.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking of jurisdictions, after a decade of neglect of Canada's space industry by the Harper Conservatives, our government on this side has reinvested in it. In fact, the National Capital Region is a growing hub for this innovative sector. Indeed, helping Canada gain a unique perspective on our planet, support science, and develop groundbreaking applications and services. The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, I see that the Conservatives are very enthusiastic today, but first of all, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question and for her work, Madam Speaker. Earlier this year, I announced it's a good thing that you're applauding her because she does excellent work. At the beginning of the year, Madam Speaker announced the release of the Canadian Strategy for Satellite Earth Observation, a landmark program that will create jobs, stimulate growth, and help us better understand our planet and our universe, Madam Speaker. This strategy is designed to provide useful...
Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Tax season is a very stressful time for many Canadians, especially seniors who rely on paper packages to file because they don't have access to digital options. This year, on top of having their GIS clawed back, many working seniors are now facing the prospect of filing late because this government's incapable of sending out timely or accurate T4s, affecting seniors like Rosemary in Calgary. Madam Speaker, when can Canadian seniors expect to receive their accurate tax information, and will this government extend the filing date for financially at-risk seniors?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The CRA understands that this has been a stressful time for seniors. While paper T4A forms were initially misprinted, the digital copies given to the CRA have been accurate since the start of tax season. Impacted seniors can file online at any time using these digital documents. There is therefore no plan to extend the tax filing deadline at this time. Thank you very much.
Honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Madam Speaker, my riding of Niagara is the #1 leisure tourism destination in this country. Yet since April of 2020, there has been zero representation from Niagara on Destination Canada's Board of Directors. That means through the whole pandemic, which has hit our national tourism sector the hardest, Niagara has been without a voice at the table, despite there being 2 vacancies right now in need of appointment. Does no one in this NDP Liberal government understand the significance of Niagara to Canada's tourism economy? When will they reappoint someone from Niagara to Destination?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Niagara is a beautiful part of this country, and we are absolutely looking forward to welcoming tourists to Niagara and to tourism destinations right across Canada. In fact, just recently, Destination Canada was thrilled by our announcement to change our border measures. We are opening up to the world, Madam Speaker. Tourists are coming back, and Destination Canada is going to play a key role in that, and I and the Minister will work with Destination Canada to complete the Board of Directors appointments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Surrey Moose Mountain. Surrey Moose Mountain, yes.
Madam Speaker, a lack of federal consultation with the province of Saskatchewan resulted in a massive cost increase over RCMP retroactive pay. Provinces fund 70% of RCMP policing costs, yet the federal Liberals refused input from the provincial government on the issue, despite an agreement requiring collaboration. Rural communities, villages, towns, and cities across the province cannot afford this. When will the government stop ignoring Saskatchewan, fulfill their commitments, and actually give these communities a much-needed break?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the
Thank you, Madam
Minister of Public
Speaker.
Safety.
The administration of justice, including policing, is the responsibility of provinces and territories. They are the ones that are best placed to choose the policing services that meet the needs of their communities. The current policing services agreement between the RCMP and provinces and territories and municipalities at the time it was negotiated included consultation with parties like the province of Saskatchewan. We support Saskatchewan. We are continuing to work with provinces like Saskatchewan to deal with the new contract that was signed by the RCMP. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes, he does. The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
While COVID-19 remains a significant issue in the global south, my question is to do with tuberculosis. And last year, more than 4 million people globally were diagnosed with tuberculosis, and they were diagnosed where it was missed by health services, fueling preventable deaths. I'd like to mention Dr. Paul Farmer when I'm speaking of tuberculosis, as he died last month, a distinguished doctor and researcher who devoted his life to ending this scourge. But my question is for our Minister of International Development. Could you please tell us what Canada is doing to help countries in the South address the
Honourable Minister of International Development.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member from Aurora Oak Ridge Richmond Hill for her advocacy on this very important issue. And the member, yes, her hard work as well. Thank you very much. I'm glad you acknowledge that. There you go. And the member is right. Tuberculosis is second only to COVID-19 as the world's leading infectious disease killer. That's why yesterday during World Tuberculosis Day, I had the pleasure of announcing an $11 million investment to TB Reach before a group of volunteers of Results Canada and other advocacy groups. TB Reach initiatives increase the ability to detect and treat tuberculosis in vulnerable populations, including dedicated focus on vulnerable women and girls, people living with HIV/AIDS, social and economically disadvantaged groups, and migrant workers. Thank you.
Excellent answer. Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Federal courts are not being maximized to their full potential, which is adding to costs and limiting opportunity in communities like mine. Port Alberni has the only deep-sea port on the west coast of Vancouver Island and has been advocating for federal support to develop a floating dry dock. Yet Canada doesn't have a program to build floating dry docks in federally regulated ports or in rural communities. Will the government finally develop a national floating dry dock fund to support local economies and workers in communities like mine?
Yeah. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. As you know, the Minister for Transport has worked on a number of files since he got to this portfolio with regards to ports, notably, and I will do a follow-up with him with regards to his riding. Thank you.
And that's the end of oral questions. We have a point of order from the Honourable Member for Edmonton West. Yes.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Point of order rising in a question period. We heard the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance repeat the myth of the neutral carbon tax. I'd like to table page 18 of volume 1 of the most recent public accounts that shows $250 million was raised to the GST on the carbon tax. It was also not given back, but also proceeds were used from the carbon tax for federal programming.
Will member have unanimous consent to table this one? No. There's no unanimous consent. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The other day during a debate, the member from Battlefield Crowfoot was heckling me while I was trying to speak. Today, the same member heckled the member from Oakville in the House. I'd like to try and assist this member to try and refrain from exercising his misogyny and remind him that it's not appropriate to heckle women in the House, and I'd like him to apologize to the member from Oakville. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Member for raising the point of order, and actually it's not appropriate to heckle, period, but definitely and certainly not women colleagues. I think I don't see the Honourable Member, nobody raising, but I do advise members to refrain from heckling at all times. Orders. A point of order being raised by rappel au règlement de la...
Point of order from the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, it's the first time that I rise in the House to make a point of order. I have to admit, I'll be echoing my opposition colleague. The opposition says they want to defend official languages, but when they yell in the House like this, there's no respect for the interpreters who are trying to provide interpretation. My first language is French, and when I can't hear because the opposition members are yelling, that's no respect for the interpreters who are trying to translate what's happening here in the House. Thank you to the Honourable Member for the point of order. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. Heckling and in the House is never welcome, especially regarding how it affects our interpreters and the discomfort it produces.
Ordre du jour. No.
Dépôt des documents. Dépôt des... Tabling of documents.
Documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36.8a, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 17 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
I wasn't in the chair. Does the Honourable Member have... No. It's okay. Table. Introduction of government bills. Ms. Annan, seconded by Ms. Pettipat-Taylor. Ms. Annan for Ms. Freeland, seconded by Ms. Pettipat-Taylor, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Federal Provincial Fiscal Arrangements Act and to authorize certain payments to be made out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Cette motion est réputée.
This is deemed adopted.